the president. Joining us now is Dr. Lance Dodes of the Boston Psychoanalytic Society and Institute. He's a former assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. And back with us is Eugene Robinson. Dr. Dodes, what are we seeing here in these new stories about the president telling people things that they absolutely know to be true, that are on video, where they hear his voice? That's fake. That's not me, even after he publicly apologized for every word of it?
Yes, well, I think it's another example of his being close to psychosis when he is stressed. When he says things like this, which are not in his interest, he would be better off saying, I'm sorry, that was a mistake, and let it go. But when he goes back and then denies reality, people have trouble understanding that. The simple explanation for it, which people don't want to hear, is that he's not in control of himself. This is what we mean when we say that somebody is becoming psychotic or is briefly psychotic. So all of his delusional ideas come up when he is stressed in some way, and then he loses track of reality because it doesn't fit what he needs to believe. The problem has been that we think of people as psychotic people as being folks who think that they are Napoleon, and that's easy to tell. And if you're not that, people think you're not psychotic. But unfortunately, the world is more complicated, and people like Donald Trump are on the border, and they slip into delusional thinking when stressed. An extremely dangerous thing, naturally, for anybody, especially somebody who has been so wantonly unconcerned about the welfare of others and willing to do anything to promote himself. So he's an enormous present danger to us from the standpoint of creating a nuclear war, and even from the standpoint of doing what he can to destroy democracy, as well as attacking ethnic groups the way he's done.
Gene Robinson, Dr. Dodes just said something right at the beginning of that's so important. He said that it's not in his interest, it is not in Donald Trump's interest to say anything that brings up the Access Hollywood video again. And here we are running it because of things that Donald Trump himself has said, and any other politician would understand exactly what the doctor said. He wouldn't need a psychiatrist to tell him it is not in your interest to do this. And so that's where this becomes so fascinating, is that the president is constantly doing things against his own interest, and we've just heard from the doctors because he has no control over that.
Yeah, look, as you know, Lawrence, I've written about Donald Trump's mental health several times. I may write about it again tomorrow. I'm a layman. I don't have Dr. Dodes's expertise, certainly, though I have been buttonholed and cornered and emailed by psychiatrists and psychologists for months, giving me their assessment of his mental health. And here's what I wonder. I wonder if at some point the sort of old New York playboy Donald Trump, who was in the tabloids, who would call up Page 6 in the guise of some imaginary PR guy, but who was in on the joke. This Donald Trump who created this sort of fake reality, but was in on the joke and knew that he was doing it. Did he at some point lose that awareness? Did he at some point start believing in the fake reality that he creates? And so is he able to actually convince himself that that's not him in the bus? Actually convince himself that that President Obama was not born in Hawaii? Actually convince himself of ridiculous things? And that's a really dangerous thing for the President of the United States to be living in this sort of fantasy world.
Dr. Dodes, that goes straight back to you to react to what Gene just had to say. What is that we're seeing?
Well, again, it's once you start out with the idea, with the understanding that this is a very sick man, he is truly very sick, then nothing is surprising. All of these delusional thoughts are not surprising. And, those of us who've been saying this for a long time have been able to correctly predict the things that have happened. And going forward, I will not be surprised by anything. If he were to try to dissolve the Constitution, that wouldn't shock me. Fire the Supreme Court, wage nuclear war on North Korea. these things might seem shocking, but they're consistent. He has always been consistent in this. Once you understand that he is about him, and it's a very deeply disturbed issue, he needs to, not just that he wants to, he needs to. He's not clever at all. He has to protect himself from what he sees as an existential threat by denying reality. Once you understand that, everything else follows, and it's extremely dangerous.
So, Gene, let's see if us amateurs can then apply what we've just learned to this, which is this report from the New York Times saying Mr. Trump has used closed-door conversations to question the authenticity of President Barack Obama's birth certificate. So does he need to never be wrong? Is that a reality he needs, and is that what he's reaching for in that moment?
Well, that's clearly a reality for Donald Trump, and there are 100 examples from his presidency, really, of things when he's presented with facts. He says something, and it is demonstrated that it's simply not true. The crowd size, for example, at the inauguration, and he has to be shown to be right. So he had to send poor Sean Spicer out to lie to everyone in his first appearance before the press, and insist that black was white because Donald Trump said black was white, and he has to be right. He has this need, and it's very deep-seated. I think that the doctor is right that it's not cleverness or deception from his point of view. It's something that he needs.
Dr. Dodes, I get the feeling that when you dip into any viewing of political pundits on these shows talking about what Donald Trump did today, that you are probably feeling that the analysis is missing the point whenever it's not turning on the notion that this is a very sick man.
Well, I think that's true. It's not that what they're saying isn't so. I mean, that many observers have accurately said that he's ill. But yes, I think that if not just the commentators, but the Congress needs to understand all those people who are now supporting Donald Trump are kidding themselves if they think that this is not an extremely incapable, disordered, sick individual. They're kidding themselves, and no one seems to want to accept that. Someone else pointed out that the worst possible case for America is to have somebody who is not grossly psychotic, which everyone would know and throw him out, but close enough with a veneer to get by. That's Donald Trump. He's like the classic, he's like the classic villain in the James Bond movies or any other literature. He's villainous because of his sociopathy, his psychopathy, but with a tremendous veneer, which he is extremely good at. And people keep on looking at the veneer.
Dr. Lance Dodes, thank you very much for joining us once again.
Sure.
Really important to have your input. Eugene Robinson, thank you, as always, for joining us. Really appreciate it.